If you drive Route 119 through Fayette County, Pennsylvania, between Connellsville and Uniontown, and you know what you are looking for, you will see them. Brick domes, dozens of them, hundreds of them, sitting in rows along the hillsides above the Youghiogheny River, half buried in the slope, overgrown with trees and brush and wild grape, their arched openings dark, their brickwork crumbling, their domed crowns broken open to the sky in places where a century of freeze and thaw and root pressure has split the masonry. Some of them are in farmers' fields, some of them are in backyards, some of them are in the woods behind strip malls and gas stations and housing developments that were built on top of the coal patches they replaced. They line both banks of the Youghiogheny for 30 miles. They climb the ridgelines between the river towns. They sit beside the Great Allegheny Passage Trail, where cyclists and hikers pass within feet of them and glance at them and keep moving because nobody has told them what they are looking at. They are beehive coke ovens. They are the machines that made Pittsburgh's steel industry possible. At their peak in 1913, there were 38,000 of them in the Connellsville coke region of Fayette and Westmoreland counties, burning day and night, producing half the nation's supply of metallurgical coke, the fuel that fed the blast furnaces at Carnegie's Edgar Thomson Works in Braddock, and the Cary furnaces in Rankin, and the Homestead Works across the Monongahela, and the Jones and Laughlin South Side Works, and every other blast furnace in the Pittsburgh district. 2,000 rail cars per day hauled the coke from the ovens to the furnaces. The smoke from 38,000 burning ovens darkened the sky over the Youghiogheny Valley every hour of every day for 50 years. Charles Van Hise, the president of the University of Wisconsin, passed through the region on a train around the turn of the century and was compelled to describe what he saw from the window. Long rows of beehive ovens from which flame is bursting and dense clouds of smoke issuing, making the sky dark. By night, the scene is rendered indescribably vivid by these numerous burning pits. Van Hise was a geologist. He was describing the landscape in clinical terms. He was underselling it. Thousands of those ovens are still standing. They are the most visible industrial ruins in Pennsylvania. Nobody has done a video about them. I went to find them. The Connellsville Coke region sits on the Pittsburgh coal seam, a geological formation that runs beneath southwestern Pennsylvania in a broad band across Fayette and Westmoreland counties. Coal exists in many places across Appalachia. The section of the Pittsburgh seam centered on the town of Connellsville was different. The seam was 7 feet thick, which earned it the local name the 9-foot seam, an exaggeration that stuck. The coal was nearly pure carbon. It was low in sulfur, it was low in phosphorus. It was almost entirely free of the slate and shale and mineral impurities that contaminated competing deposits from other regions. The Connellsville coal did not need to be washed before coking. It did not need to be crushed. It did not need to be sorted or blended with other grades. You pulled it out of the ground with a pick and a shovel, loaded it into a mine car, hauled it to the surface, dumped it into a beehive oven, and what came out the other end, 48 to 72 hours later, was metallurgical coke of a quality that no other coal field in the world could match. The coke was almost 100% pure carbon. It was hard, it was porous, it was light enough to permit the passage of the blast furnace's hot air through the charge, and strong enough to support the weight of the ore and limestone above it in the furnace stack without collapsing. Connellsville coke was not one option among several for the Pittsburgh ironmasters. It was the standard. The American iron and steel industry was not merely fueled by Connellsville coke, it was built around it. As early as 1860, Connellsville coke was used exclusively in Pittsburgh's first successful blast furnace, the Clinton furnace, and from that point forward, every major iron-making and steel-making operation in the Pittsburgh district depended on the coke that came from the narrow strip of coal running through the hills above the Youghiogheny River. The strip was 2 to 3 miles wide. It was 50 miles long. It ran from Latrobe in the north through Mount Pleasant, Dawson, Connellsville, and south to Uniontown. It was within 50 miles of Pittsburgh by rail. It was the coal that made the coke that made the steel that built the country. Every furnace on this channel, every ton of pig iron that the Cary furnaces produced, every heat of steel that the Homestead Works poured, Every rail and beam and bridge cable and armor plate that rolled out of the Pittsburgh mills began here in a 7-foot seam of coal beneath the hills of Fayette County, baked in a brick dome the size of a dining room table. The beehive oven was exactly what its name described. A dome of stone or brick, roughly 12 feet in diameter at the base and 6 to 7 feet high at the crown, shaped like a beehive or an igloo, with an arched opening in the front wall, roughly 2 feet wide and 3 feet high, and a circular hole in the top of the dome called the trunnel head, through which the coal was charged. The ovens were built in long rows, side by side, sharing common walls between adjacent ovens to conserve heat and brick. A single coke works could contain 50 to 500 ovens in a row, built into the hillside, so that the trunnel heads at the top were level with the coal dump above, and the arched openings at the front faced the railroad tracks below. The design allowed coal to be dumped into the ovens from the top, and the finished coke to be raked out from the front directly into waiting railroad cars. The coking process was simple in concept and brutal in execution. Workers dumped coal through the trunnel head into the oven, forming a layer approximately 2 feet thick on the oven floor. The front opening was sealed with brick, loam, or clay, leaving small gaps for air intake. The residual heat from the previous charge ignited the fresh coal, and the coking process began. Over the next 48 to 72 hours, the volatile matter in the coal, the tar, the ammonia, the phenols, the hydrocarbon gases, the hydrogen, burned off, leaving behind the fixed carbon skeleton that constituted the finished coke. The chemical byproducts of this combustion, a toxic cocktail of ammonia gas, coal tar, sulfur dioxide, phenols, and dense particulate smoke, went straight into the air. There was no stack, there was no scrubber, there was no filtration system, there was no attempt to capture or contain the emissions, and the gases and the smoke poured from the trunnel head and from every gap in the sealed front wall and rose into the atmosphere above the valley, mixing with the emissions from the hundreds or thousands of adjacent ovens in the same row, creating a permanent cloud of industrial pollution that hung over the Youghiogheny Valley from the 1870s through the 1920s. W.J. Locke of the United States Immigration Commission, surveying the region in 1911, noted with the precision of a government investigator that the smoke and gas from some ovens destroy all vegetation around the small mining communities. The trees died, the gardens died, the hillsides around the coke works were bare earth and ash and slag. The workers and their families breathed the same air that had killed the vegetation. When the coking was complete, the drawer went to work. The drawer was the man who emptied the oven. He was the man who opened the sealed front wall by pulling out the bricks with an iron bar, exposing the interior of the oven, which was filled with a red-hot mass of glowing coke at temperatures that exceeded 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The drawer sprayed the red-hot mass with approximately 850 gallons of water from a hose to bring the temperature down enough that the coke could be handled. The water hit the coke and flashed into a wall of steam that enveloped the drawer and everything around him in a scalding cloud of vapor and coal gas. When the steam cleared enough to see, the drawer entered the oven opening with his tool, a long, heavy, single-toothed iron rake, and began pulling the coke from the dome onto the ground in front of the oven. The coke came out in chunks and slabs, still hot enough to burn through clothing and leather boots. The drawer raked the oven clean, working in heat that radiated from the brick walls and the floor and the glowing remnants of the charge, breathing steam and coal gas and the residual chemical vapors that the quenching had not fully dissipated. When the oven was empty, the drawer or his crew forked the coke into a waiting railroad car using 14 tine iron forks, each forkful lifting a mass of hot, porous, brittle carbon that crumbled and shattered and sent clouds of fine carbon dust into the air with every motion. Then the trunnel head was opened, fresh coal was dumped in, the front was sealed, and the cycle started again. The men who did this work were immigrants. By 1890, 1/4 of the workers in the Connellsville coke region were from southern and eastern Europe, Hungarians, Slovaks, Poles, Italians, and Croatians who had been recruited to work the ovens and the mines that fed them. The earlier workforce had been predominantly native-born Americans and immigrants from the British Isles, Welsh, English, Irish, and Scottish miners who had brought their coal mining skills from the old country. The companies brought in the Eastern Europeans specifically because they would accept lower wages than the established workforce, a strategy that Henry Clay Frick employed deliberately and openly. A Pittsburgh Dispatch reporter who visited Frick's Moorwood property in 1879, when Frick brought the first wave of Eastern European immigrants to his coke works, described them as a convenient lever to the operator's hand, wherewith he regulates the more demanding spirit of his other laborers. The immigrants were a tool. Their function was to suppress the wages of the existing workers by providing a cheaper alternative. The companies used them accordingly. The workers lived in patch towns, company-built settlements adjacent to the coke works, consisting of rows of identical wooden houses constructed by the company on company-owned land. The houses were rented to the workers. The rent was deducted from their wages. The wages were frequently paid in scrip, company-issued currency that was redeemable only at the company store, where the prices were set by the company and where the workers had no choice but to shop because the nearest independent merchant was miles away and the scrip was worthless anywhere else. The workers worked 84 hours per week, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, exposed to coal dust in the mines and to heat and smoke and chemical fumes at the ovens. A worker named Matthew J. Welsh, writing to the Pittsburgh Times in April 1894 from the Connellsville district, described the condition of his fellow workers in language that the newspapers of the era rarely carried. Certainly, we are to a certain extent slaves, or we would not be toiling our lives out with work that former day slaves never dreamed of on a coke yard or in the mines. Ignorant as we are, we know that it is time to quit work and die of starvation rather than be trying to work and starving at the same time. If you want to see these ovens yourself, the best preserved and most accessible examples are along the Great Youghiogheny Passage Trail near Dunbar in Fayette County. The Penn State Fayette Coal and Coke Heritage Center in Uniontown maintains a museum and a research archive. The Library of Congress has the HAER documentation, survey number PA 283, with measured drawings and photographs. Subscribe if you want to see where the next thread on this channel leads. The man who built his empire on these ovens was Henry Clay Frick. He was born in 1849 in West Overton, Pennsylvania, the grandson of Abraham Overholt, the distillery owner who produced Old Overholt rye whiskey. Frick was 21 years old in 1870 when he identified the Connellsville coal field as the opportunity that would make him rich. He borrowed money from the Mellon banking family, the same Mellons who would later finance Gulf Oil and Alcoa and control one of the largest private fortunes in America. In March 1871, Frick partnered with his cousin John D. and began purchasing coal land and constructing beehive ovens in the Connellsville district. By 1873, the H.C. Frick Coke Company owned 400 acres of coal land and operated 200 ovens. By 1879, Frick controlled 853 ovens. He was 30 years old. He had made his first $1 million. He bought himself a 5-cent Havana cigar to celebrate. By the early 1880s, the H.C. Frick Coke Company operated over 1,000 ovens and controlled 80% of the coke supply to the Pittsburgh iron and steel industry. The Pittsburgh blast furnaces could not run without Frick's coke. He knew it. And in 1881, Andrew Carnegie knew it too. On a Sunday afternoon walk during the summer of 1881, Carnegie had a sudden realization. "We must attach this young man Frick to our concern," Carnegie said. "He has great ability and great energy. Moreover, he has the coke, and we need it." Carnegie and Frick formed a partnership that would dominate the American steel industry for nearly 2 decades, until their explosive falling out in 1900, after which the two men became the bitterest of enemies and remained so until they died, both in 1919, without reconciling. Frick became chairman of Carnegie Steel. Carnegie got the coke, the blast furnaces at the Edgar Thomson Works in Braddock, and the Homestead Works in the Monongahela, and every other Carnegie operation in the Pittsburgh district ran on Connellsville coke, baked in Frick's beehive ovens by Frick's workers, in Frick's patch towns under Frick's terms. Frick's terms were not negotiable. In 1891, Frick decided to impose a sliding scale of wages on the coke workers, tying their pay to the market price of coke. When the price dropped, the workers' wages dropped with it. Frick made his position clear in a statement that anticipated by 1 year the language he would use during the Homestead strike. "We concluded that we would end this thing once for all," Frick said, "and determine whether we had a right to employ who we pleased and discharge whom we pleased." The coke workers, already on the edge of subsistence wages, walked out. Strikes and marches spread across the Connellsville district. On April 2nd, 1891, at approximately 3 a.m., more than 1,000 workers marched on the Morewood Mine and Coke Works, one of Frick's largest operations. Frick had stationed deputy sheriffs and private security at the works. When the marchers approached, in the pre-dawn darkness, the deputies opened fire. 9 workers were killed. Many more were wounded. The dead were buried at St. John's Cemetery. The strike was broken. The ovens kept burning. The Morewood Massacre was the prelude to the Homestead Strike of 1892, which I covered in the Carey Furnaces video on this channel. Frick used the same tactics at Homestead that he had developed at Morewood: private security, strike breakers, eviction from company housing, and the willingness to use lethal force against workers who refused to accept his terms. The Connellsville Coke region was where Frick learned how to break a strike. Homestead was where he perfected it. The beehive coke oven era ended not because of the labor conditions or the environmental destruction, but because a better oven was invented. The byproduct: coke oven, developed in Europe and widely adopted by European steelmakers decades before American producers adopted it, captured the volatile gases and chemical compounds that the beehive oven vented directly into the atmosphere. The captured ammonia, tar, and coal gases were valuable industrial chemicals. The byproduct oven was cleaner, more efficient, and produced a coke that was as good or better than beehive coke. American coke producers clung to the beehive oven long past the point of economic and environmental rationality, in part because the Connellsville coal was so good that the crude beehive process still produced a superior product, and in part because the beehive oven required less capital investment and less skilled labor than the byproduct oven. By the 1920s, the transition was underway. The beehive oven shut down, the fires went out, the patch towns emptied. The workers moved on or stayed in communities that no longer had an economic reason to exist. By 1950, the Connellsville Coke region had declined from 38,000 operating ovens to a handful. The last beehive ovens in the region went cold in the mid-20th century. The ovens remained. Nobody demolished them, nobody hauled the brick away, nobody cleared the sites. The ovens were built into the hillsides, their brick walls keyed into the slope, their foundations resting on the bedrock beneath the coal seam. They were too heavy to move and too embedded in the landscape to remove without blasting, so they sat. The weather cracked the mortar, the rain washed out the clay seals, the freeze-thaw cycles split the brick. Tree seeds lodged in the cracks and grew, the roots prying the domes apart from the inside, the trunks rising through the broken crowns and spreading canopies above the ruins. Decades of leaf litter buried the floors. Wildflowers grew on the oven tops. Animals nested inside the domes. The hillsides that had been stripped bare by the smoke and the gas slowly recovered, and the ovens disappeared into the regrowth, visible only as repeating curves of brick in the undergrowth, row after row after row, climbing the ridgelines above the Youghiogheny for 30 miles. I started with a drive down Route 119, brick domes in the hillsides, hundreds of them, overgrown, crumbling, unremarked. The most visible industrial ruins in Pennsylvania, and nobody has told their story. These ovens produced the fuel that made Pittsburgh the steel capital of the world. 38,000 of them burning day and night, 2,000 rail cars a day, half the nation's coke supply for 50 years. The coke they produced fed the Carey Furnaces, the Homestead Works, the Edgar Thomson Works, every blast furnace I have covered on this channel. The men who worked the ovens raked red-hot coke from brick domes with 14-tine iron forks and 850-gallon clouds of steam, 84 hours a week, in patch towns where the wages were paid in scrip, and the company store set the prices, and the smoke killed the vegetation, and the deputies shot 9 workers at Morewood because the Coke King said he would end this thing once and for all. The ovens are still in the hillsides above the Youghiogheny River, exactly where the drawers stood, exactly where the railroad cars waited, exactly where the smoke rose into the sky that Van Hise described as dark with flame and indescribably vivid. The brick is crumbling, the domes are splitting, the trees are growing through the crowns, but the ovens are there, thousands of them, lining the valley that fueled Carnegie's furnaces, waiting for somebody to tell the story. The Penn State Fayette Coal and Coke Heritage Center in Uniontown is the primary museum. The Library of Congress HAER documentation, Survey PA 283, contains measured drawings and field photographs. The Connellsville Coke region. Historical marker erected as an Eagle Scout project by Andrew P. Miller in 1995, stands on the Great Allegheny Passage Trail in Dunbar near the ovens on the riverbank. The records are there. The ovens are there. The drawers who raked them clean are in the census records, and the company payrolls, and the parish registers of the immigrant churches that still stand in the patch towns along the Youghiogheny. Their names are not on any of the ovens. The bricks do not carry names. The bricks carry only the heat they held and the shape they were built in, and the carbon residue of the coke that was baked inside them and raked out by men whose hands and faces and lungs were coated in the same dust that coated the brick, and who went home to company houses on company streets and bought their groceries with company scrip and breathed the smoke that killed the trees and worked until they could not work and are buried in the churchyards of the towns that the ovens built. There are more of these stories, more machines, more furnaces, more men who went into the dark and came out different or didn't come out at all. Subscribe if you want to see what I pull from the records next. If you want to see the Sloss furnaces in Birmingham, the oldest blast furnaces in America, built by prisoners who were released from the state at $18.50 a month and are buried in unmarked graves beside the furnaces that are now a National Historic Landmark, that video is on screen now.